Hey, Fred, how you doing?
Not bad, Eric. Good seeing you again.
Great seeing you too. I love doing Fred Jones Professional Beauty Federation podcast episodes because I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is Donovan hits start, the recording begins, and then I ask Fred what he's working on. And basically, he goes on with the most amazing stuff in the world, all geared towards helping hairstylists. So this episode is no different. How many of these have we done, Fred, would you say? Four?
Yeah,
I,
three
I'm
or four.
guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one, each of the ones that we've done have had a topic of conversation that has something to do with, either what's going on with COVID. That's when we started doing them. And then the last few have been about how hairstylists, beauty professionals, independent beauty professionals, and employed beauty professionals, as well as salon owners with employees, can take advantage of the various programs that are out there that the government was spewing all over the place since the beginning of 2020. You like that description? Fred is laughing. The listeners can't see you laughing, but he's laughing in the screen here. The government was spewing money all over the place, like one of those cartoons with a guy grabbing a hose and money's flying out the end of the hose. So some of our listeners, I bet when they saw the title for this episode, they're like, wait a second. I thought that was so 3 years ago that there was stimulus money, but the Professional Beauty Federation, and namely Fred Jones, who I have on the episode today, says no, there is still money out there. These were basically laws that were these were programs that were put into law years ago, right, Fred, with expiration dates.
That's right.
And a couple of them have not yet expired. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Fred, I'm going to just throw it to you, and you begin as you will.
Well, thanks again for having me. And for those that haven't enjoyed listening to us before, I'll just give a brief history of the Professional Beauty Federation, which you, Eric, head up and I help manage. We were formed in 1999 in California, primarily as a policy advocacy organization, since 95% of the regulations governing our industry is set at the state level. So I've spent a lot of time in Sacramento. In fact, I think I've only missed one state board of barbering and cosmetology meeting in 24 years of service to the PBF. So I know where the bodies are buried. I know who the decision makers are. And we've had a great record of standing up for this industry since 1999, and I've been with the organization since 2000, which makes the math easy when people ask me how long I've represented this industry. But when COVID hit, everything didn't change for us. It just got bigger. And so we kind of took our mission national. And after months of prolonged lockdowns and restrictions, we said enough is enough. This is when our paths crossed with you, Eric, because we helped spearhead some grassroots campaigns and some media blitz to try to convince policymakers. And here in California, it was the governor and his health so-called experts that we were safe and that we weren't causing the spread of COVID any more so than the so-called essential businesses that never were closed down. And we actually ended up also filing not one, but two federal lawsuits to get our industry reopened, both of which were successful in that endeavor. And then, we took this national because once we were able and we saw all 50 states reopen, how do people financially recover from that? It was devastating. And in particular, how do self-employed beauty professionals, these folks don't have sick leave, how could we help them financially recover? So for the last 3 years plus, we've been working on getting money, federal money, into the pockets of our industry. It began with PPP, which were loans essentially through this Small Business Administration. Those loans, fortunately, were forgivable. And then we pivoted to some IRS tax credits. One, the ERC, Employee Retention Tax Credit, for employers of W-2 employees who were being rewarded for keeping their W-2 employees on their payroll during these COVID restrictions. That's what ERC is. And then SETC, it's actually referred to as FFCRA, but self-employed tax credits. So we've been really focused like a laser beam on trying to get these dollars into our industry because we were the most heavily impacted. I mean, if you look at restaurants, hospitality, and beauty and barbering, we were the ones that took the brunt of the COVID restrictions, the lockdowns, the quarantines, etc. So Congress actually designed these programs with industries like ours in mind. And so some folks may be a little reticent, is this going to cause me problems with the IRS? Look, these tax credits were designed for industries, the so-called non-essential industries that were so impacted by COVID. So rest assured, these programs are for us. And what we've determined 3 years ago is that absent us, most of our self-employed professionals and even a lot of our employers weren't even going to know these programs were available. It was the lion's share of these tax credits were going out to the big corporations and the big companies, that had in-house CPAs and in-house lawyers, or at least of counsel lawyers. And so salon owners, and more especially individual self-employed behind the chair professionals, they were clueless. They had no idea that these dollars were available to them. And even if they did, they had no idea how to even apply for them. And it is a complicated process. You actually have to amend prior tax returns. You need to deal with what your prior tax returns showed in terms of your income. There's a lot of behind the scenes efforts to apply for these funds. So we actually went and partnered with tax experts. We created these online portals to make it as seamless and simple as possible. And that's what we've been focused on for the last 3 years.
Yep. So that was a lot to digest. Bottom line is that there are still programs out there that beauty professionals can take advantage of. You mentioned the ERC and the SETC. They're always very unsexy names, right? Like there's no marketing people in government. I guess the marketing people maybe, those are maybe the speech writers and stuff like that. But I mean, these things are, it almost feels like they want to make them wonky and difficult to understand so they can limit the amount of tax credits paid out. I don't know. Certainly with the ERC, that's been the one that's been more publicized. Maybe it's older. I don't know if that's true or not. But that's the one that kind of a cottage industry of accounting firms and maybe legal firms have crafted themselves in such a way to satisfy ERC claims and take a percentage of the money on the ERC claims, and the IRS, or the government, the Treasury, et cetera, has been surprised by the number of claims that it's received versus what it anticipated when they created the law. And right, I think I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but I think they anticipated maybe $80 billion in claims, and I think they're up to 250, maybe $300 billion in claims. Mm-hmm. So the government has come out and said there's this illegitimate industry of companies, firms, that are encouraging people to file fraudulent claims on ERC, and we're going to put a moratorium? They're going to put a pause. They're going to put a something on it. And so, listeners, I'm saying this because you may have heard some things about how ERC is shut down, or they're not doing it anymore, or they think if you file, it's going to be fraud. I don't doubt that there's fraud in ERC claims, but that doesn't mean that legitimate claims still cannot get paid out. Am I accurate there?
Yeah, and so for your listeners, there are two different tax credits that the IRS is administering, and they're allowing, by law, you're allowed to retroactively apply for these up to 3 years. And the two programs, one is aimed at employers of W-2 employees, and that's the ERC of which you mentioned. But a lesser known program is designed specifically for independent beauty pros, self-employed. And that's what we call SETC, the self-employment tax credit. Yes, on the ERC, a whole cottage industry was created of basically ambulance chasers. The IRS refers to them as promoters. And if you watched any television or listened to the radio, we were all blitzed. This was prior to September of last year with ads, get your money, pay later, that kind of stuff. So the IRS, they just didn't anticipate so many people applying for this. And by the way, there's always fraud in any government program that offers money. So whether it's welfare programs or these COVID relief dollars, there's always fraud. But what really caused the IRS pause was the magnitude, and what was driving it was this ambulance chasing new cottage industry that was created for employers to apply for ERC. So it was blowing a big hole in the federal budget, and it was far exceeding their expectations. So they started focusing on the promoters. Now, we're different than that, Eric. We're actually a trade association that actually represents businesses and individuals that were impacted by COVID. Again, as I said previously, these tax credits were designed for us, for our industry and similar hospitality-related industries. So our major partner on ERC was actually audited by the IRS, and they were concerned that they were promoting. And when they found out, no, they were just helping us. And by the way, some restaurant associations in the various states in the United States, they immediately dropped the audit. So we're not part of that ambulance chasing cottage industry of promoters that caused the IRS to put a halt on processing new claims beginning back in September of 23. The good news is they've resumed processing claims post-September, but it's a trickle. I'm hearing 1,500 to 2,000 a week are getting processed when they're receiving still to this day 20,000 ERC claims every week. So they're still in the red, if you will, in terms of keeping up with the legitimate, verifiable applications, and that's why it's taking months and months and even years for them to finally pay out on ERC claims.
Okay, so I wanted to bring that up because ERC has been much more public than SETC, again, the self-employed tax credit. Let's start focusing on that. Why did I not hear about this until you told me about it? And why has no one else, have very, very few other people heard about it?
Yeah, so I think the promoters of the ERC, that new cottage industry, there's a lot more money involved in representing business owners with employers. Serious money. It was $27,000 per employee. So if you've got 100 employees, you do the math. It was serious money. So there was an incentive, a monetary incentive that created this behemoth cottage industry of ambulance chasers around ERC. That's not the case with this self-employed tax credit. These are individuals, and individuals in industries that don't typically make a lot of money. So it never really made sense for these promoters to get into the SETC field and to start promoting them through paid advertisement and marketing. Again, we all heard ERC. Nobody's heard SETC, and it's actually referred to as the family's first coronavirus, FFCRA, but we've shortened it into SETC just to make it more simple.
So somebody might be listening to this and thinking, what about my accountant? I have an accountant. I'm a self-employed beauty professional at a Salon Republic or not at wherever. I'm a self-employed beauty professional. I have an accountant. He's great. Let's say his name is Ken. How come Ken hasn't brought this to me? Isn't that Ken's job?
That SOB Ken, sleeping on the job. So most self-employed professionals, their accountant is H&R Block or TurboTax. It ain't Ken. They're not first name basis.
Ken's a cheap accountant.
Right. But even the Kens of our employers weren't telling people about ERC. And that's because the average accountant is, meat and potatoes. They're all about what the laws have always been for 50 years and what they'll continue to be. COVID came along. There were a number of congressional acts that were passed, including the CARES Act, and there were amendments to those CARES Act, and then there were promulgated regulations by the IRS. And most accountants said, I'm not dealing with this COVID stuff. It's one time. It's a flash in the pan. I'm not even going to learn it, let alone tell my clients about it. And
and I'll just jump in. We're required to have, we at Salon Republic are required to have one of the monster accounting firms. What are there, 4 now? There used to be 6, the big 6. Mm-hmm. Then it was like the big 5. I think it's 4, maybe it's even 3 now. Mm-hmm. But one of the big ones is ours. And they didn't know about anything. They didn't know about this because they've got all their people, like you just said, they've got all their people out there doing what they typically do, just a normal course of business. That's how they make their normal fees. There's no one within even the big organizations that's going out there and reading the thousands of pages of new COVID laws in order to see if there's something they can do for their clients. There weren't even really fee structures around because so many of these stimulus programs are new. They didn't even go look into it. So it required the little niche-y people to actually spend the time to learn about it and then bring it to the people. And this is one of the things that I think is so ironic about the government getting mad at the cottage industry. Ambulance chasers, sure, a lot of them are going to be kind of like that. But if it weren't for the ambulance chasers, many of the people who took the brunt of the economic impact of COVID would never have heard about these laws that the government put into place. So there's absolutely a place for this cottage industry, and all they're doing is marketing the government's own program for the government. So, I think it really bothers me that the government goes after them and accuses them of all this fraud. All they're doing is they actually read the law and they're helping people file based on what's written in the law. Okay, so keep going. So bottom line is the bread and butter accountant doesn't have the time, probably doesn't have the skill or maybe the incentive to go and read through all these new laws, but some people have. Okay, so
well, let me just make some comments before you ask me the next question.
Okay.
It's the old saying, nature deplores a vacuum. There was a vacuum here. There was a void, and there was a lot of money sitting on the table. I'm proud to say, and you know this, Eric, we were way out in front on ERC long before this cottage industry. And what inspired us to, I remember it. I read a Forbes magazine article that said 72% of accountants weren't informing their employer-based clients about ERC. And boy, the light went off. Like, that's general accountants, and in our industry, it's probably even higher percentage. So that's really what inspired us to get out in front of this and to go look for some tax experts outside of the normal accounting world who would focus like a laser beam on that tax credit for our employers. So we were a year ahead of this whole cottage industry, I'm proud to say. SETC still hasn't
Hold on.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to let you pat the organization on the back a little bit more here. So give us some numbers on ERC. How many beauty professionals were we able to help file and get credits for?
We're in the thousands. We've actually processed and ruled out probably tens of thousands because some people weren't eligible for
Qualified.
whatever reason. They didn't have employee, whatever. But I mean, we've helped tens of thousands, but in terms of getting money, it's in the thousands of range on
And
ERC.
no, I mean
It's
total
hundreds of millions of
dollars.
dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah,
Hundreds of millions of dollars the PBF has helped beauty professionals get back.
that's right. And, that was ERC, SETC's another whole different animal. But yes,
Yeah.
so
So
we are helping our industry. And what really helps me feel good about the long days we spend marketing this and money is almost every single person we've helped acquire these dollars would not have even known or would not have known how to get. So our effort, every dollar we've injected in this industry would not have happened had we not filled that void.
Okay. So that is real. That is truth. It's almost hard to believe because it's so amazing, but it is absolutely true. I've been here along the road with Fred, and it's been going on for a couple of years now. The PBF is kind of like it's like a silent. I mean, I don't want to have to come up with something to call us on the fly here, but I mean, so few people know about the organization and what we've been doing, and it's been doing these amazing things, especially the last 3 years with the money. Okay, but the main reason I wanted to get you on this time is to focus on the SETC. I wanted to give a background on the ERC. I wanted to mention why it's been in the news, et cetera. But really, the real value for the listeners to take from this episode is the SETC, the Self-Employed Tax Credit, the one that very few people have heard of, because the fact is it's individual business owners, and the amount of stimulus funds that these guys and girls are owed typically doesn't justify a professional company to go out there and market for them or market to attract them to then file for them. However, the PBF did put a lot of effort into helping people get this. And so let's talk about that. What did the PBF do in order to help an independent beauty professional file for this SETC money?
Yeah, and I think the best way of thinking of SETC is it's essentially paid sick leave and family care credits for people that aren't employees and therefore don't get those benefits as an employee of an employer, right? Okay. So that's really kind of the purpose behind SETC is the federal government's coming in and stepping in and saying, we recognize that these quote unquote non-essential industries were seriously harmed financially by COVID. We also recognize because they're independent, they don't have an employer that they can lean on to cover their losses. So we, the federal government, will pay a percentage of the taxes they paid already as a means of helping them recoup their losses. And so that's really kind of it in a nutshell. This is a tax credit based on self-employment taxes that they've already paid in either 2020 and or 2021. And they're entitled to a percentage of those tax dollars as a tax credit based on how many days they had to miss work because of either being sick by COVID, being locked out of their salon because of COVID quarantines and lockdowns, and even, and this is the lion's share of the dollars, if they had children who were in school and because the schools were in lockdown, they had to stay home and take care of their child. Any of those days impacted by COVID, they can receive a tax credit for those losses. And by the way, this is different than PPP. It's not a loan that either has to be paid back or forgiven. It's not a loan at all. It's a credit based on the taxes they already paid, and they can spend it any way they want, and it's totally tax-free because, again, it's already been paid from their taxes.
Yeah. Okay. Spectacular. In other words, it seems like a vast majority of our listeners would qualify for this, because who doesn't qualify for what you just said, right? Different impacts from COVID. Our industry, we all suffered from it. Okay. So
Well,
what
let
does
me just
somebody
add
do?
one
Okay.
caveat to that. Provided they paid their taxes in 2020 and or 2021, and they had self-employed income listed in their Schedule C. So as long as they were paying self-employed income taxes in their 1040s in 2020 or 2021, and they were impacted by COVID, then they're golden.
Okay. So what do they do? How do they apply?
So we've gone through a lot of iterations in the last 2.5 years on SETC. We've learned from our mistakes. We've learned from hesitation from folks. We used to have an upfront fee to cover our marketing and to cover our tax experts' expenses. We now, for the last 3.5 months, have just an unbeatable approach to this effort. So you're able to apply through us. All you have to do is go to probeautyrelief.com, and it'll direct you to one of 3 options. If you're self-employed, go to SETC. You will not have to pay anything out of pocket, no upfront fee. You only pay the fee for our tax experts after you get your money from the IRS. So there's no cost to you. There's no risk to you, because if it doesn't work and you don't get paid, we don't get paid. Our partners don't get paid. And we have a partner now that is willing to fund upfront and advance the entire tax credit at no extra cost to the claimant, and pay them within 20 days of them filing their application with the IRS. So it's an unbeatable offer to our self-employed beauty pros.
So they're fronting the money, and what happens if the money for some reason doesn't get paid by the government?
So there will be a contract, of course. If things don't get paid, we have to get paid back, but it's not happening. Our tax experts know. They take the tax returns from each individual self-employed pro. They see what they paid. They do the calculation. We've never had a problem, period, of doing this. So, but the risk, to answer your question, is really on us. It's not on the self-employed beauty professional. And that's what the message I want to deliver to you, to your listeners. There's no risk to you. There's no out-of-pocket expense or upfront fees. You only get paid if we get paid.
Okay, so give me an idea of how much money this is to a beauty professional who, let's say, filed $50,000 of income for 2020.
So I can just tell you the hard numbers. Our average right now is around $6,600, $6,700 is the SET amount. Legally, you're entitled up to $32,200. But that's if, you were making pretty decent money even in the height of COVID or the year before, 2019. So if you were making really decent money, you could get to the maximum of $32,200. So, it's a serious chunk of change. But on average, after we've done all the math and we've helped several hundred people already go through this process, our industry is around just shy of $7,000.
Okay, and one of the other amazing things that the organization did is prepare an online application, correct?
That's right. Yeah, everything's online. Now, if you have your 2020 and 2021 1040s, your tax returns, in an electronic format like Adobe, PDF, as long as you've got your taxes and you can reduce them to an electronic emailable format, the whole process can be over in 25 minutes in terms of you applying online. And then what happens is our partners will send all that paperwork to you via the mail. They'll include a self-addressed stamped envelope to the IRS. And all you have to do is sign where the sticker tells you to sign, date where the sticker tells you to date, drop it in that self-addressed stamped envelope, which we will be tracking to make sure the United States Postal Service delivers it to the IRS on your behalf once you send it in the mail. So that's the entire process.
And the accounting firm that the PBF has partnered with, they have people to answer the phone who have questions, et cetera?
That's right. Tens of people in the call center, dozens and dozens of tax experts that are doing this work. But we as a trade association, because they don't just do service for our industry, they're dealing with some other hospitality industries and some real estate agents. We've actually stood up our own office of a couple of ladies who will speak directly to our individual beauty professionals if they have questions beyond the ability or interest of our partners to answer. So we're going the full distance here in trying to handhold our beauty professionals. Because look, we recognize this is an artistic industry. It's not populated by CPAs and lawyers. It's populated by people that really know their trade, really have a skill set that's unique and valuable, but it's right brain. We're bringing in the left side of the brain to help out in terms of crunching the numbers, filling out the paperwork. All they have to do now is answer a series of very simple questions, determine the dates that were impacted by COVID, provide their tax information, as I mentioned earlier, and wait in the mail for that paperwork to come for them to date and sign and send to the IRS.
Okay, and as the listeners are digesting all of this, some are probably thinking, okay, what's in it for you? And when I say you, I'm talking about the company who does all this stuff.
Right.
The PBF Fred, have put a lot of effort into this. So what is the fee to the filer?
The fee, which they don't pay until they get paid, is 20% of what their total tax credit is. That's it. That pays our partners. That helps us recoup our marketing expenses. I can tell you that our revamped program, our advance, all of these other things that we've put in place in the last 3.5 months have come directly at a cost to the PBF. So we are getting a smaller and smaller piece of that pie to cover our expenses. That's why we're relying upon podcasts like yours, influencers on social media, because we just don't have a large budget. Let me reiterate, even though I didn't say it in this podcast, the Professional Beauty Federation is a 501 Chapter C, 501c6 nonprofit trade association recognized by the IRS. So we're nonprofit. We're not trying to profit off of anybody. Our goal here is to help our industry recoup their losses from COVID. And we had to bring in experts, and we have to market this to inform people, and that costs money. So the total fee, it's 20%. That's it.
Yeah. Which I think is very fair. I don't know what a lot of what the cottage industry, let's call it in quotes, was charging for ERC. I've heard higher numbers. I actually knew some people who were accountants, and then they started doing ERC type claims. And I've heard percentages going up to 40%, for some of these things. And but look, I mean, it costs money to pay for the people to answer the phone and to answer 45 minutes of questions. It costs money to file. It costs money to do all these things. And I'd like to take a moment to say that that no one has to pay for an accounting firm to do this for them. They could file this on their own, right?
That's right.
If they go, and I'm sure there's information online to help them to do that. But of course, it's nice to have options. If you don't want to spend a lot of your time trying to figure it out and doing it, and maybe you did some things wrong, here's an opportunity to help you do it in 20 or 30 minutes. I remember, Fred.
Well, just on that point, if I could, Eric, when we discovered that folks weren't applying for these tax credits, we started by marketing this exactly as you said. Hey, are you aware of this? You need to apply. Nobody was responding to that. They didn't have an accountant, or as we discussed previously, their accountant wasn't interested in getting into the weeds. They didn't have the bandwidth to do it or the desire. For a host of reasons, just informing people wasn't enough. And that's why we stepped up. That's why we found the experts. That's why we made the partnerships. And that's why we created these online streamlined application processes.
Right. And it costs money to build a website to actually do all this. There's computer programming involved, and that was expensive. And then to inform people costs money, doesn't it? Which is kind of one of the frustrating parts of this is like, hey, everybody, here's all this money that's free that you can get. But to say that at scale costs money, whether it's online, on a social platform, or even here. I mean, just as a free podcast, but I'll spend an hour and a half on this podcast. I don't charge anything for it. But I mean, there's time and resources that are required just to let people know about it. So
and let me just say, this is not a free lunch. This isn't free money. This is a tax credit based on the taxes you already paid. And it's based on a law that was designed for our industry. So you've already paid this money. Why would you let it go to waste? And what we haven't stressed yet, Eric, and I will now, the ability to retroactively claim these dollars expire at the end of this year.
Okay.
So
that was my next question.
If you don't get the money that you've already paid, it's gone.
Yeah. There you go. So, it's such an interesting thing, trying to help people. I almost feel like talking about it. I almost feel like I sound like one of these scammer sort of sounding people that are out there. But, how else do you say there's all this stuff out there for you to get, your money back? I do appreciate that. That is a change in semantics, but very important. Money's already been paid in there. It's like you're getting it back. I think that's pretty important. Yeah. All right. What else do you want to say about it before we let the people go?
Well, again, it's not a scam. That's one of the big concerns we get a lot, especially since we're trying to market this, kind of guerrilla warfare tactics, on the cheap, right? Through social media. And who trusts Instagram posts, right? You'd be a fool to, right? And these are very intimate financial details that we have to get from folks to be able to prepare the necessary paperwork and filings with the IRS. So I totally get the whole scam concern. It sounds too good to be true, but it's not. And what I like to do is I like to remind our beauty pros of those dark days of prolonged COVID lockdowns and restrictions. That's why this was created by Congress. Not to reward, but to help you recoup the losses of those dark days. And a lot of folks don't want to remember that. That was 4 years ago. I have to remind them, we were screwed and tattooed by government. And oftentimes it was prolonged without any scientific data or justification. So you're entitled to this legally and morally. But the problem is it goes away at the end of this year. So we want to do everything we can to shout on the rooftops and to help hold people's hands throughout the whole process to make sure our industry gets its due share.
Absolutely. What you just said reminds me of those times and all of the beauty professionals who were begging for, quote, someone to advocate for them. Remember that?
That's right.
Nobody's advocating for us. The government should be doing something for us and so on and so forth. Well, the answer was loudly and clearly the Professional Beauty Federation was advocating. The lawsuits were very successful, eventually opened up salons. I've mentioned that, multiple times on the podcast. And as far as responding to the people saying the government should do something, the government did something. Okay, enough to make up for it? No, but this is the something. This is the something that everybody kind of assumes that the government should do, and so it just requires maybe a little bit of effort and a little bit of faith to learn enough about it to give people the comfort to try it. Like Fred has said, if we throw in ERC, thousands and thousands have. And they've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars back, which is one of the proudest things I think you and I can say together here.
Indeed. And if there's influencers out there, even if you have 1,000 followers or less, we would ask you to promote this program. Go to Pro Beauty Federation, our handle on Instagram, and repost what we're doing. Help us spread the word. This is about helping us recover from very dark months where we were mistreated, disrespected, and ignored. Finally, Congress stepped up, but Congress isn't marketing this. We are. Help us get the word out. And thank you, Eric, for helping us through your platform spread the word.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And I just want to say also, anybody out there thinking, how come I haven't heard about this before? How come XYZ big influencer in the industry hasn't said anything? I just want to say that a lot of the big influencers, and this is not a dig on them, but they want money. And the PBF doesn't have a lot of money. Like, this goes back to the getting the word out costs money, but there's not a whole lot of money that the PBF is taking to spend to inform people, right? So it's kind of a tricky situation.
It is, but I will shout out, Ashley Norman, Larissa Love. There has been some heavy hitters in our industry that have been willing to help us promote this, and we are eternally grateful for their willingness to help this industry and their followers.
Absolutely. And there's going to be more. Fred, you and I have spoken to some. There's going to be more who are going to do it because they know it's a phenomenally valuable thing for their followers to know about. Mm-hmm. And so,
and by the way, I left off Hair Love University has been fantastic. So there's been a number, obviously the Hair Game podcast. There's been a number of folks that have been willing to help, but this should be viral. And we've got only a few months left. Help us make this go viral.
Absolutely. All right, Fred, thanks again. Thanks again for the time. Thanks for helping the industry and listeners. As always, you can hit up the PBF. And website for the PBF is
Beauty Federation. Beautyfederation.org. O-R-G.
Yep. And then once again, the website is probeautyrelief.com, correct?
That's right.
And so we created a direct link to the SETC, but it's not just the FETC, it's the ERC. It's the three options that you named earlier. Right. So the organization's done an amazing job. I don't take credit. Fred and team are doing most of the work here, and you've made it as easy as humanly possible for people to help themselves. And so hopefully people hear the message and they help themselves more than ever. So thank you so much for the time, Fred.
Thanks for the opportunity again, Eric.